She was 20 years old. She had just finished filming in New York on a movie that put her in the same world as Audrey Hepburn. Real sets, real stars, real expectations. People around her weren't treating her like a novelty anymore. They were talking about potential, about what she could become if she got the time and the freedom to keep going. Dorothy Stratton had done everything right. She separated from her husband. She hired lawyers. She moved out. She built a future that didn't include him. And still, on an August afternoon in 1980, she walked into a house in Los Angeles believing she could end things peacefully, that the man who had controlled her since she was 17 would simply let her go. She was wrong. This is the story of a woman who escaped, who built something real, who was on the edge of genuine stardom, and it is also the story of why leaving was never going to be enough, because the man who claimed to have made her could not survive her becoming something on her own. In 1978, Dorothy Stratton was 17, scooping ice cream at a Dairy Queen in Coquitlam, British Columbia. She worked after school to help at home in a way that actually mattered, and she learned early what it felt like to be needed. She pictured the future. It looked simple. Get through the week in a quiet suburb outside Vancouver without adding more stress to the people she loved. Those who knew her described her as shy, polite, utterly innocent about the wider world. She didn't think of herself as beautiful. She had no framework for what her appearance might mean to certain kinds of people. People who made careers out of identifying potential in young women and extracting value from it. Coquitlam was quiet and familiar, the kind of place where life stays close to home. Dorothy went to school, worked her shifts, and kept her head down. And because no one had spent years telling her she was extraordinary, she didn't move through the world with any defense against someone who would treat her looks like leverage. That ordinariness matters. It explains why what came next worked so effectively. Dorothy had no armor against flattery because she had never needed any. She had no instinct for manipulation because she had never encountered it in its professional form. When someone finally did identify her, not as a person, but as an opportunity, she had no tools to recognize what was happening. She was, in every sense, unprepared for the man who walked into that Dairy Queen. His name was Paul Snider. He was 26, 9 years older than Dorothy, and he dressed like a man performing success. Fur, flashy boots, jewelry, the kind of look meant to announce itself. In later profiles, he's repeatedly described as a hustler who lived off angles and access, someone always searching for the next opening that could turn into a lifestyle. When Snider saw Dorothy behind the counter, he saw what he later called a bombshell smoldering underneath her wholesome exterior. He began pursuing her immediately, not with casual interest, with strategy. Friends who watched the courtship unfold said Snider had a gift for targeting vulnerabilities. He complimented Dorothy on exactly the things she felt most insecure about, building her confidence in ways that made her dependent on his validation. He brought flowers. He took her on expensive dates. He bought her gifts she couldn't afford. He escorted her to her senior prom, a detail that reportedly made her classmates uncomfortable, watching a grown man in his mid-20s slow dance with a high school girl. Actress Marielle Hemingway, who later portrayed Dorothy on film, described it plainly. You think of him, and you think of a wolf stalking his prey. Within months, Snider had identified his opportunity. Playboy magazine had announced a nationwide search for its 25th anniversary centerfold. Snider became fixated on the idea that Dorothy could win. He began pressuring her to pose for test photographs, professional, nude, the kind Playboy required. Dorothy resisted. She later said it took 2 weeks of persuasion before she agreed. I had never taken my clothes off for anyone I didn't know, she explained in an interview. The discomfort was obvious. The reluctance was real. But Snider was persistent, and Dorothy was 18, and he had spent months convincing her that he knew what was best for her future. There was one additional obstacle. Dorothy was still under British Columbia's legal age of majority, which was 19. Her mother's signature was required on the Playboy model release forms. Snider forged it. The photos went to Los Angeles. Playboy's West Coast photo editor, Marilyn Grabowski, saw them and wanted Dorothy on the next plane. Grabowski later recalled how inexperienced Dorothy seemed, a babe in the woods, not used to thinking of herself as beautiful. Dorothy flew to Los Angeles for the first time in her life. Was her first time on a plane, her first time in a limousine. Everything that happened next, the career, the fame, the tragedy, started with that forged signature. Dorothy didn't become the face of that anniversary search, but the photos did what Snyder wanted them to do. They got Playboy's attention. Dorothy was pulled into the magazine's world fast, and her life shifted from suburban routine to a machine built around visibility, image, and access. The move from noticed to marketable happened quickly, faster than she had the experience to protect herself from what came with it. Dorothy was selected as Miss August 1979. She shortened her surname from Stratton to Stratton, a change tied to making her name easier to sell and remember. By then, she was already in Los Angeles, stepping deeper into Playboy's orbit through mansion events, photo sessions, and press appearances. For a girl from Coquitlam, it must have felt like waking up inside someone else's life. The Playboy mansion in the late 1970s operated like its own ecosystem, part workplace, part social club, part launchpad. Dorothy navigated it with the same politeness she'd carried her whole life. People around her often remembered her as genuinely warm, someone who didn't act like she belonged to the glamour even when she was living inside it. Snyder came with her to Los Angeles and positioned himself as her manager, her protector, her gatekeeper. In June 1979, they married in Las Vegas, an act that multiple accounts describe as reluctant on Dorothy's side, shaped by obligation as much as affection. "I owe it to him," she told a Playboy photo editor. "I was a nobody when he found me." That logic, that her success belonged to him because he had initiated it, became the trap. People close to Dorothy later described the marriage as controlling. Snyder didn't just want to be her husband, he wanted to be the person through whom everything passed. Her schedule, her access, her choices. The public image suggested a young woman stepping into confidence and opportunity. Privately, the relationship narrowed her world, turning everyday decisions into something that had to be managed around his moods. And as long as her career remained tied to him, not just emotionally, but practically, there was no clean way out. In April 1980, Dorothy Stratten was named Playmate of the Year, Playboy's highest honor. The announcement came at a luncheon at the Playboy Mansion on April 30th, where Hugh Hefner presented her with a major prize package and introduced her as the kind of playmate the brand believed could cross over beyond the magazine. That same night, she appeared on The Tonight Show starring Johnny Carson, smiling through the bright lights and the jokes like she belonged there. One day, she was scooping ice cream in Coquitlam. Now she was being introduced to America as Playboy's newest star, with publicity and momentum moving faster than her personal life could keep up with. Along with the attention came the grind people don't always picture. Early calls, constant interviews, camera-giddy expectations, and a public image that had to stay polished even when her private life was unraveling. It was a crash course in how fame works, fast, demanding, and often indifferent to what it costs the person inside it. Work started coming in from multiple directions: television bookings, meetings, screen tests, conversations that sounded like possibility. And the more she looked like a future actress instead of a one-off headline, the less control Snyder had over the story. That was precisely the problem. People in Dorothy's circle were encouraging her to deal with legitimate professionals, agents, managers, business people, so decisions didn't have to flow through her husband. The more those relationships formed, the less Snyder could position himself as her gatekeeper. Meetings happened without him. Plans got made without him. The infrastructure around her was starting to look like a career built for Dorothy, not a hustle built around Dorothy. For her, that shift felt like oxygen. For the first time, she was dealing with people whose job was to protect her interests, not extract something from her. It didn't happen in one clean break. Instead, it unfolded in small steps. New meetings, new voices, new boundaries. Until more of her time, her money, and her future were finally in her hands. Her acting work expanded in small but real steps. She appeared on television shows like Buck Rogers in the 25th Century and Fantasy Island, the kind of roles that gave young performers experience and visibility. She picked up film credits too. Comedies, low-budget projects, parts that weren't glamorous but were forward motion. Each set taught her something. Each credit made the next one easier. People who worked around her noticed she wasn't just showing up anymore. She was learning. She was trying. She was starting to believe she could belong in this industry for real. Then came the call that changed everything. Peter Bogdanovich was an acclaimed director known for The Last Picture Show and Paper Moon. He met Dorothy through Playboy's world and saw something more than a centerfold, a presence he believed could hold the screen. He offered her a role in They All Laughed, a romantic comedy he was developing for production in New York. The cast would include Audrey Hepburn, John Ritter, and Ben Gazzara. For Dorothy, this was the threshold. Crossing it meant stepping into a different category. Real work, real co-stars, real expectations. It also meant leaving Los Angeles for months, leaving Snyder behind, and operating in a world he couldn't hover over. Filming began in March 1980. Dorothy flew to New York to start work on They All Laughed, and the distance mattered immediately. Snyder wanted to be there. He wanted access to the set, to her schedule, to the people around her. But Dorothy managed to create space. Different accounts describe her using practical excuses. Closed sets, busy call times, limited access, anything that could buy her breathing room without triggering a confrontation. For the first time since they met, she had days that weren't supervised. The work changed her. People on the production noticed a young woman coming out of a shell, quiet at first, then steadier as she realized she could do the job. Working alongside Audrey Hepburn gave her a model for what a professional life could look like. Discipline come control. On that set, Dorothy was treated like a working actress, expected to show up, focus, and deliver. For the first time, she was surrounded by routines that belonged to work, not control. Rehearsals, marks, wardrobe, notes, and the normal pressure of a film set. It wasn't easy, but it was clean in a way her life in Los Angeles hadn't been. Each day she finished, she proved something to herself. She could do this without being managed. Bogdanovich didn't just cast her, he focused on her. He was older, famous, and in charge of the production. And that imbalance mattered even if it didn't look like danger in the moment. During the shoot, the relationship became personal. Whatever people think of it now, for Dorothy, it marked a shift. She was experiencing attention that felt less like ownership and more like being seen. The affair began during production, and it went beyond romance. It came down to contrast. In New York, Dorothy had freedom, work, movement, choices, while back in Los Angeles, her marriage treated freedom like betrayal. In a grim irony, They All Laughed revolves around jealousy and surveillance. Private detectives hired to follow women suspected of infidelity. Dorothy was filming that plot while trying to keep her own life from being monitored, measured, and punished. She stayed in touch with Snyder through letters and calls, careful with her wording, apologetic in tone, trying to avoid lighting a fuse. In one letter written during her time away, she asked for more freedom in their relationship. Quiet language that still carried a clear message. She was pulling back. By late June 1980, just after their first wedding anniversary, Dorothy formally separated from Snyder. She returned briefly to Los Angeles to deal with the reality of what separation meant. Friends later reported a confrontation where she even offered to give up acting and return to Canada if it would save the marriage. The gesture was desperate and conciliatory, and it fit the pattern of how she tried to end conflict, by taking the hit herself, by offering peace at her own expense. Snyder rejected it angrily. He didn't want a quiet life in Canada. He wanted the version of Dorothy that made him feel powerful. By August, Dorothy had her own place in Beverly Hills, a tangible marker of independence. In practice, she spent much of her time with Bogdanovich. She was building a life that didn't include Paul Snyder. She had separated legally and physically. She had new support, new prospects, and a future that was starting to look like it belonged to her. She had done what people tell you to do when you're trying to leave a controlling relationship, and she believed it would be enough. The months following the separation were catastrophic for Snyder. His identity had been built around Dorothy's rise. Without her to manage, he had no real role. Without her money, he had no stability. Without her presence, he had no status in an industry that had only ever tolerated him because she was attached to him. He hired a private investigator to follow her in New York, hoping to confirm what he already feared, that she wasn't coming back. And as the distance became permanent, the story in his head hardened into something more dangerous than heartbreak. Dorothy leaving didn't just end a marriage. It stripped away the version of him that felt important. The financial unraveling was swift. Snyder reportedly began selling off items connected to her success to cover expenses, prizes, possessions, anything that could be turned into cash. What had been proof of her achievement became his emergency fund, and when he tried to latch on to other shortcuts into status, nothing stuck long enough to replace the identity he had built around her. As Dorothy pulled away, Snyder's behavior grew more erratic and more desperate. He tried to force contact, tried to regain leverage, tried to make her independence cost something. The more permanent her exit became, the more he acted like the only way to matter was to frighten her. On the morning of August 14, 1980, Dorothy was still trying to make the separation clean. She had been arranging the logistics through her representation, and she planned one last good faith payment to soften the financial blow. She left with $1,100 in cash, believing that one final conversation could close the door without turning it into a war. She had told her lawyer she hoped they could remain friends. That detail reveals everything about who Dorothy Stratten was. She had spent 2 years being controlled and cornered. She had watched her husband spiral as her success threatened his identity. She had separated, moved out, built an independent life. And still, her instinct was toward kindness, toward a peaceful ending, toward the hope that the man she had married might accept reality without punishing her for it. People around Dorothy urged caution. Friends and colleagues had warned her about Snyder's behavior, and Bogdanovich didn't want her going alone. There were people close to her who understood that this wasn't just a breakup anymore. It was a man reacting to the loss of control. Dorothy went anyway, alone. One friend later said she slipped away from the people trying to protect her because she believed civility was possible, that the person she had married at 19 would not cross that line. Around noon, she arrived at a West Los Angeles house where she and Snyder had once lived with roommates. That afternoon, the roommates were out. No one else was inside. What happened inside is the ending people still struggle to say out loud. Dorothy was killed there, and Snyder died at the scene as well. An act that turned her escape into a headline and her future into a crime report. A friend who knew them later said it felt like a message to the people she'd grown close to the life she'd chosen, and to anyone he believed had taken her from him. She was buried at Westwood Village Memorial Park Cemetery in Los Angeles, the same cemetery where Marilyn Monroe is buried. Peter Bogdanovich chose the inscription for her grave marker, a line from Ernest Hemingway's A Farewell to Arms. If people bring so much courage to this world, the world has to kill them to break them. So of course it kills them. Force. The people around Dorothy, that quote carried a brutal kind of accuracy. She had found the nerve to leave, the will to start over, and the belief that she deserved a life that belonged to her. And one man couldn't accept the change, what it meant for his power over her and what it exposed about how he saw her in the first place. Hugh Hefner was shaken by the news, and people close to the mansion later described the atmosphere as stunned and grieving. Sis Rundle, who worked at Playboy and knew Dorothy, summed it up in a line that still gets repeated because it feels true. Part of him died. Part of all of us died, because Dorothy was special to us. Bogdanovich stayed connected to Dorothy's family afterward. He helped support her mother and became close to her younger sister, Louise. In 1988, he married Louise. They divorced in 2001. Years later, he explained the decision in family terms, saying that if Dorothy had lived, this would have been his family anyway. But the tragedy didn't just break hearts. It also triggered a fight over narrative. Who got to tell Dorothy's story, and what version of her would survive in public? Journalist Teresa Carpenter's Death of a Playmate, published in The Village Voice in November 1980, became the most influential early account, and it later won the 1981 Pulitzer Prize for feature writing. That piece shaped how millions learned her name, not as a rising actress first, but as a young woman surrounded by older, louder forces competing to claim her. Hollywood moved quickly. Bob Fosse's 1983 film Star 80 dramatized the story, with Marielle Hemingway as Dorothy and Eric Roberts as Snyder. The title itself came from Snyder's vanity plate, one more reminder that he treated her success like a brand he owned. In 1981, NBC aired the TV movie Death of a Centerfold starring Jamie Lee Curtis, another fast retelling that turned a real life into a consumable event. Bogdanovich also wrote The Killing of the Unicorn 1984, blaming Playboy's culture for pulling young women into a world where opportunity and danger could sit in the same room. The book kept Dorothy in the spotlight, but it also kept the dispute alive. Because once a story like this goes public, everyone has an argument about what it means, and Dorothy herself is no longer here to correct the record. And then, there's the part that hurts in a quieter way. Dorothy had just worked on They All Laughed in the Same Production World as Audrey Hepburn. The film's release became complicated after her death, and even people who saw it later often pointed to the same thing. She didn't look like a novelty on screen. She looked natural, present, like someone who could have grown into real range if time had let her. Biographer Stephen Kushner later argued that, given time, she likely would have become a genuine star. And beyond the career math is the simpler truth people kept repeating. She was kind, she was earnest, and she treated people like they mattered, even when her own life was being pulled apart. Dorothy's story keeps getting retold because it still drags up the same ugly questions. How do you spot control when it's dressed up as love? Why does leaving sometimes make the danger worse? Dorothy did what people are told to do. Lawyers, distance, paperwork, a separate life. But to someone who believes you belong to them, independence reads like humiliation, proof that you can exist without permission. Her death doesn't reflect a failure of judgment. It reflects a choice made by the person who refused to let her move on. Dorothy Stratton's legacy isn't a warning about picking wrong. It's a reminder that some people don't want love, credit, or closure. They want ownership. And when that ownership breaks, they would rather destroy than release. There is a photograph of Dorothy Stratton from 1979, taken during her first year in Los Angeles. She is smiling. Not the practiced smile of a professional model, but something more open, like she still can't quite believe where she's standing. There's wonder in it, a little nerves, a lot of hope. She didn't know how the story would end. She only knew she wanted out of the version of life where every choice had to be negotiated, every move watched, every bit of freedom treated like a problem. She believed she could close the door carefully. One last talk, one last attempt at peace. And that basic belief in a calm ending is part of what makes the reality so brutal. What she did know was that she'd been given a real chance, and she wanted to prove she could handle it. Not as a headline, not as someone else's project, but as herself. People who worked with her noticed it. Directors noticed it. Even in small moments, she carried the kind of presence that tends to grow with time. She is buried in Westwood now, her grave marked with Hemingway's words about courage and the world that breaks. Visitors still leave flowers. She was 20 years old. She had done everything people tell you to do when you're trying to leave, and she deserved so much more time.